Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Donald Trump has defied his critics, many in his own party, by declaring a national emergency to bypass Congress to get the billions of dollars he says he needs to build a border wall with Mexico. At a news conference at the White House, he said a barrier was needed to stop an invasion of drugs, gangs, human traffickers and undocumented migrants. However, Democrats say the move is unconstitutional because the president has exaggerated problems on the border to try to fulfill a rash campaign promise, and they'll fight him all the way to the Supreme Court. But what is the truth on the ground? Well, our correspondent Dan Johnson is in San Diego on the US-Mexico border. Dan.
Donald Trump's basic plan is that by building a wall, securing the border, you can focus the drugs, the goods, the people who are crossing, whether they are criminals or asylum seekers, to points like this, the official border crossings, and you can free up border agents to focus their energy here too. But there will be disappointment from people and politicians on Donald Trump's own side that he's failed to get the $5 billion that he wanted for the wall, and his Democrat opponents are already saying that this is a manufactured crisis and an illegal declaration. I should warn you, there are flashing images coming up. This dividing line's become the defining issue of Donald Trump's presidency. It split American opinion and gridlocked government like never before.
The President of the United States.
Now there's a funding deal, but it falls $4 billion short of Donald Trump's target. So today, he raised the stakes.
We're going to confront the national security crisis on our southern border, and we're going to do it one way or the other. We have to do it. They say walls don't work. Walls work 100%. I'm going to be signing a national emergency. We're talking about an invasion of our country with drugs, with human traffickers, with all types of criminals and gangs.
These are the final footsteps of that human trafficking trail.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Los Estados Unidos, illegal.
After a 2,500-mile journey where the fence runs out, this mother and her daughter fall into the arms of US Border Patrol. My little girl is hungry, she says, and I don't have any money. And there are over 1,000 more who cross illegally every day. There's already a fence of one kind or another along a third of the 2,000-mile border.
18-foot steel slatted, concrete-filled barrier with anti-climb plates on top.
Here, it's already being upgraded, and it's making a difference.
This barrier takes us significantly more time to penetrate, to cut through. It takes 10, 20, up to 30 minutes, depending on the type of blade that you're using. This border barrier can be compromised in about 1 minute and 20 seconds.
So the chief here shares the president's ambition to extend this fence across these hills.
We have to have a barrier or we'll never win that time-distance game. The smugglers are using those people that they're trying to claim asylum as a distraction to overload my resources so they can run drugs in other areas. That's a huge threat.
But the numbers are way down, aren't they?
I wouldn't say it's nothing like it was. I would say that it's changed.
After spending time here, it would be easy to question the president's rhetoric, his talk of a crisis and the threat these people pose, how simple he makes a wall sound as a solution. But it's clear there is a complex game of cat and mouse being played here, and the Border Patrol agents say it is unsustainable. Manpower, horsepower, all of it is stretched. Donald Trump staked so much on defending this border and seeing this fence go further. Now, it looks like this fight will go to court. Dan Johnson, BBC News, San Diego.
Well, our North America editor John Sopel is at the White House for us this evening. John, what's been the reaction to the president's decision?
Well, I don't think there's been surprise, Clive, because Donald Trump faced a choice that was pretty unpalatable. He was either going to admit defeat, that there wouldn't be the funds for his border wall and the Democrats would have won, or he could choose the nuclear option and declare this national emergency. He's gone for the nuclear option. And we've already had some reaction from Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House and the minority leader in the Senate, saying the president's unlawful declaration over a crisis that does not exist does great violence to our Constitution and makes America less safe. And I think what they're doing is setting the stage for some kind of legal challenge that will delay any building work. It could go all the way to the Supreme Court, and that will be a kind of fascinating deliberation that they have to make on this, because on the one hand, it's absolutely true. Thousands of people, as we saw in Dan Johnson's report, are trying to get across the border illegally. But if you look at this situation statistically, the number of people trying to get across has actually been falling, and most of the drugs that are coming into the country are coming across the established border crossings. So what I think the Supreme Court, if it gets that far, will have to weigh is this simple question. Is this a genuine national emergency, or is this a political emergency for Donald Trump?
OK, John, thank you for that. John Sopel there, live at the White House.
In the US, President Trump today declared a national emergency on his country's border with Mexico so he can finally fund his controversial wall. He insisted emergency powers were needed to stop what he called an invasion by human traffickers and drugs gangs. The president declared walls work, but his measure is likely to be challenged in court. He is the first to do it, to try to force through a campaign pledge. From Washington, here's our correspondent, Emma Murphy.
He says there's a crisis on the southern border so bad that America's very being is under threat. And so President Trump today declared a national emergency. An emergency which many believe is manufactured entirely in the president's head for political gain.
So we're going to be signing today and registering national emergency. And it's a great thing to do.
As he signed the declaration, the president effectively overruled Congress and unilaterally took $8 billion from the budget to build his much-talked-of wall.
We have an invasion of drugs and criminals coming into our country that we stop, but it's very hard to stop. With a wall, it would be very easy.
Parts of the border already have a wall. Many Republicans and Democrats question the benefit of adding more, especially at a time when border crossings are at a 4-decade low. The president's declaration will be fought through the courts, and unwittingly, he may have provided his critics with their best line of attack.
I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster. We will build a great wall along the southern border.
The wall and border control was at the heart of Donald Trump's presidential campaign.
Do we love the wall?
Yet for all the fervour, he struggled to implement much of what he promised. And it's certainly not Mexico paying for it.
And thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The Democrats had refused to give the president the money he wanted for the wall. They say that this is a power grab by a desperate man, and they will fight it all the way to the Supreme Court. There's no doubt that in the months ahead, it will be lawyers working busily on the wall, not builders. Emma Murphy, ITV News, Washington.
Congress won't give him the money for his wall, so President Trump is planning to build it without them. He's declaring a national emergency and plans to use his executive powers to siphon off billions from the Pentagon and the Department of Treasury. It's drawn criticism from both political parties. Our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris is outside the White House.
Krish, here's what he's done. With this national emergency, it means that he can access all kinds of funds that he never had access to before, primarily from the military. With that, and using other executive powers, as well as a bipartisan bill that was actually signed off on last night, giving him more than $1.3 billion for his wall, he can move ahead. As he has promised his base, he will. Now, it's difficult, though, really, to see this as a win, except perhaps in their eyes, because for the deal maker in chief, this is evidence that he simply couldn't make a deal on this. He's facing an absolute avalanche of criticism, not only from the Democrats, but from conservatives who believe in the Constitution. They always gave President Obama a very hard time when they saw him as practicing kind of executive overreach and bypassing Congress. And here they are with their own president, President Trump, doing exactly the same thing, except perhaps more egregiously in this case, because it's something, this funding for the wall, that Congress has said it will not fund, and therefore he's directly bypassing it. I think a bigger question here, though, too, is there really a national security emergency on the border? We go to the border regularly. We've been down to El Paso. There are certainly times when it feels like a humanitarian crisis, but I think there are real questions about whether or not you would ever define what's going on there now as a security crisis. I think the fact that the president today, once he's finished the meetings following this, he's signed all of these bills, he's due to get on his helicopter, get on a plane and go to Mar-a-Lago, where we know on weekends he likes to play golf. That raises real questions. If you want to sell the idea that this is America in the grip of a national security crisis on the border, surely that's not what you do. It began as a slogan the president could remember, to remind him to talk about immigration on the campaign trail. When his supporters took up the chant, he told them that Mexico would pay for the wall. But now he's declared a national emergency on the border to raid the congressional coffers to get the money he needs.
So I'm going to be signing a national emergency. It's been signed by other presidents. There's rarely been a problem. They sign it. Nobody cares. I guess they weren't very exciting. But nobody cares. They sign it for far less important things. We're talking about an invasion of our country with drugs, with human traffickers, with all types of criminals and gangs.
Since 1976, when Congress passed the National Emergencies Act, presidents have declared at least 58 states of emergency, not counting disaster declarations for weather events. George W. Bush racked up 12, President Obama 13, President Trump is reaching 4. 31 remain in force today as presidents routinely extend those already in place. The declarations in themselves aren't unusual. In the main, they're used to impose sanctions on a foreign power or to seize property. But this is something special. It's the first time a president has declared an emergency to seize money for a campaign promise that Congress has refused to fund. And that leaves his move open to legal challenges, that this is an emergency of politics, not of national security.
And we will have a national emergency, and we will then be sued, and they will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, even though it shouldn't be there. And we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling, and then we'll end up in the Supreme Court.
A bipartisan deal in Congress overnight to avoid another government shutdown greenlit more than $1.3 billion for a wall. But the president says he's declaring the emergency because that's simply not enough. He responded angrily when asked whether there is really an emergency on the border.
You are presenting information about what's happening at the border, calling it an invasion, talking about women with duct tape over their mouths and so on. And yet there's a lot of Department of Homeland Security data out there that shows border crossings at a near record low. That shows undocumented immigrants committing crime at lower levels.
I cannot stay silent on the president's threat to declare a national emergency to pay for his boondoggle of a border wall. This lawless end run around Congress is a craven act built on lies and distraction.
There are Republican opponents in Congress too, not only to the wall, but to presidential overreach. But they'll likely be quiet on Trump's border emergency, caught in the undertow of a president on whom they depend for their power, even as he undermines theirs.
Well, joining me now from Washington is the Washington Post columnist, Jonathan Capehart. Thanks for joining us. I mean, isn't the truth everyone's a loser here?
Well, certainly President Trump is a loser in that he's gotten $1.3 billion for border security funding. That's down from the $1.8 billion that Congress said they were going to give him. And the most important thing is it is way down from the $20 billion that the Senate had approved in the previous Congress in a bill that originally was thought to have support from the White House. But then once the Senate got on the road to approving it, the Trump administration set about to kill the bill, which is exactly what they did.
But what do you think should happen now? I mean, is this something that Democrats should still fight? Should it go to court? Should it go, should they keep fighting it or just move on?
No, I think they're going to fight it because there's a larger issue here. Congress, when President Trump came into office, he had the House and the Senate. And a Republican-controlled House and Senate could not get through funding for the president's beloved border wall. Now that Democrats are in control in the House, he's now deciding he's going to declare a national emergency. Not that there is one, both in terms of drugs coming over the border or even, quote-unquote, illegal crossings, but he's just doing this in order to free up money, divert money from different programs in order to do this. This is something that Republicans in the Obama administration, as a reporter pointed out, would be screaming to high heaven because they would view that, and they did view it, as a bit of executive overreach. Well, in this case, that's exactly what it is from the Democrats' point of view, and they are going to take him to court. The one place where I think they would quibble, where a lot of analysts are quibbling with the president, he's expecting a challenge to come through the Ninth Circuit, which is viewed as the most liberal circuit in the federal judiciary here in the United States. But it is possible that a conservative federal appeals court circuit based out of Richmond, Virginia, could look askance at this as something that's violating the Constitution.
Right, but I mean, how do you, I mean, is there any point fighting him with facts and truth, given that he's really doing this to please the people who cheer him at his rallies and get people like Ann Coulter off his back?
Right. I understand the premise of your question, but we're dealing with a larger issue here, and that is how our democracy functions. And there are Republicans on Capitol Hill who are worried that this action that the president is taking is something that could boomerang on them if indeed a Democrat wins the White House in 2020. A precedent would be set for a president to decide that, you know, gun violence is a national emergency that requires the president to go around Congress, for instance, or climate change. So this is something that I think will be litigated by Democrats, but is also something that I think a lot of people think should be challenged because they think it's not only wrong, but unconstitutional.
Do you think that's the real agenda? I mean, you know, a lot of people are watching Vice at the moment, looking at sort of, you know, people in power who wanted to seize executive authority. You know, do you think that's really what's going on here? That, you know, a concentration of power in the presidency?
Well, sure. This is actually one more step in what has been an ongoing concentration of power in the executive. This is not something that started with President Trump. There were complaints of this when President Obama was in the White House, certainly when President George W. Bush was in the White House, especially after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. But this action that he's taken today is something that goes even a step further, which is why I brought up the fact that there are Republicans who are worried about the boomerang effect if a Democrat takes over the White House in 2020.
So how much do you fear for your democracy tonight?
Well, you know, actually, compared to 2 years ago, I'm actually a little more hopeful, simply because the Democrats are in control of the White House, in control of the House of Representatives, and therefore there is a check in one of the two houses of Congress on this president.
Jonathan Capehart, thank you very much.